our last tutorial, we ended up rigging our character, but there were a few underlying issues that she still had that we want to fix up. So if I move her hand here by pressing G on my keyboard, you're going to see a few issues that crop up. First up being that her hair is moving kind of awkwardly along with it, which we obviously don't want, as well as the top of the collar also kind of following the hand, which we obviously don't want as well. So I'm going to reset that by pressing Alt plus G, and we're going to fix those in this video using a process called weight painting. So to enter weight paint mode in Blender, click on any 3D model you have in object mode, then go up here and click on weight paint, or for the shortcut, you can press Ctrl plus Tab, then click on weight paint like that. Now our hair has turned blue, and the reason it's blue is because we are currently in what's called a vertex group that has no weight painting applied to it. So you can actually switch between vertex groups right at the top of Blender here, or you can go to this tab right here, the Object Data Properties tab, the one that's like an upside down triangle, and you can use this menu right here to switch between vertex groups as well. But you can also do that right up here, and I'm just switching between them using the arrow keys on my keyboard because that's often a lot faster. So if I scroll through my vertex groups here, you can see that this is the bone for our head, which is called Def Spine 001 because we're using Rigify. And now we can see that the color of our hair has changed here. So you can think of vertex groups kind of as little containers or homes for vertices. And remember, a vertice is just all these different points in our model. So this is a vertice, this is a vertice, this is a vertice, this is a vertice. You can think of vertex groups as kind of groupings and pairings of vertices that we can use to apply weights to our model. And we already have a ton of vertex groups because Rigify generated a bunch of them for us when we applied automatic weights on this model. This is our hair, what it looks like right now. And as you can see, the top of our hair is super red, which means that it has 100% influence. Each color in weight painting represents how much influence a bone, in this case here, our head bone, has on this part of our model. So the top of our head has 100% influence, meaning that if we pose our head around, it's going to follow our hair perfectly, whereas the bottom part has a lot less influence and may not be following our head 100% of the time. The color blue, which is what we were looking at earlier when we looked through all these other bones, that means this is unweighted, and it's best not to worry about the specifics of these colors too much because these are just a gradient and a visualization for what are essentially just intensity values. You could even think of them as percentages on all the vertices that make up your model. And by entering weight paint mode, there's also a few tools here that are now available to us that I'm gonna look at right up here. So first tool is the default tool that we have selected already called Draw. This is just, as you can see right here from the icon, a brush tool. So we can just click on different vertices on our model and see that they'll start to get painted red. And they're getting painted red because our currently selected weight, which again, you can just think of this as percentage, 1 being 100%, 0 being 0%. You can think of that as your currently selected intensity, right? So if I click on my model with 0 weight, it's going to start painting things blue. And if I click on my model with a 100% weight, it's going to start painting things red. So that's pretty cool. And there's also a symmetry option right here that you can enable in weight paint mode, which is super helpful for symmetrizing things on your model if you have perfectly symmetrized bones. For example, if I had symmetry enabled and I was painting her knee here, every little adjustment I'd make on this right knee, or excuse me, her left, I guess, her left knee, would get perfectly symmetrized to the other side because we're using Rigify, which already has perfectly symmetrical bones and weights already set up for us, which is awesome. So that's what the weight option does, but there's another option right here called Strength, which is essentially your opacity. So if you've used Photoshop or any similar application to that, Clip Studio Paint, etc., they all have opacity options for their brushes. Most painting apps do, and that's what you can think of your strength as. It's kind of your opacity. So for example, if I set this to, 0% influence, I want no influence on this part of my model, but I set my strength to 50%, aka my opacity to 50%, then click on this vert, it's gonna turn green because again, if we put strength to 100% and then weight to 50%, it's also going to be very, very green because that is what 50% weight on your model looks like. And that sounds kind of confusing, like why they even separated, but this is very useful for other tools, not as much the brush tool usually, like the gradient tool. So for example, if I wanted a really smooth gradient on my model, I'll go to the right orthographic view and set my weight to 0, but my strength to 50%. Then if I hold left click and drag with the gradient tool, you're going to see we're going to get a beautiful smooth transition between gradients. And being able to lower our strength can kind of help with those gradations, especially when we're using other tools like blur as well, which blur does exactly what you would expect. It kind of blurs the transition between all of your weights. So I'm going to do all that. I'm going to do all of that with Control+C. So I'm just going to spam Control+C a bunch of times. Actually, I'll redo that with Control+Shift+C a few times. There we go. So now let's actually talk about the different options we have for these brushes, because they're actually extremely important and there's some extremely frustrating things that I need to explain right off the bat. So if I press N on my keyboard here and I go to Tool, you're going to see that this is where we have tool options, which is also available right here in the properties editor. So these are literally the same menu. You can use either one, but in my case here, I'm going to use this one from the little N menu in the 3D viewport because it's a little bit more convenient for me. So there's a few super useful options here because by default, you're going to be using this draw tool when weight painting a lot. And I would highly recommend whenever you're using the draw tool for low poly models like this one to set your fall off in your brush settings to this right here. So this brush shape is flat, which means that every single time, let's set our weight to 100% here and our strength to 100% as well. So every single time you click on a vert, it's just gonna like straight up paint that vert 100%. If you don't have this enabled and you have like one of these shapes, for example, and you click again, it can kind of like create smooth transitions, which can be nice, but realistically in low poly modeling, you're often kind of just painting things like 100% or 0% a lot of the time. So that can be kind of distracting and not actually super helpful. So a lot of the time when I'm doing low poly models, I'll be using this flat brush shape because it's just a lot more of like the result I would actually want when doing low poly modeling and weight painting. So that's one useful option. But again, you can change this to whatever you want. You can like move these around to get the exact kind of fall off on your brush that you would actually like. Just super useful, but I'm just going to use this flat option right here. We already talked about X symmetry, which symmetrizes the opposite bone to have the same weights as the bone you're painting, which is super helpful. But there's also another super useful option right here called front faces only. Now, this is something, again, that's really weird, worth talking about. If we try to go to X-ray view in weight painting mode, you're going to notice that it says X-ray not available in current mode. That's because we're in rendered view. Which you can see by pressing Z, we're in rendered view. But if we go to solid view, then press Alt+Z, you actually can use X-ray mode while weight painting. So if you want to use X-ray mode and have your textures visible, you can click this little drop down right here next to the top right of your viewport, go to flat, then texture. And in theory, that should actually just show your textures and allow X-ray view to actually be used, which is really awesome and helpful when weight painting. So that's that, but anyway, I mention that because that's what front faces only does. If I turn off front faces only, that lets us paint through objects, which can be useful sometimes. So I'll turn off front faces only and symmetry just to make sure that's not part of this equation. Then I'm going to set weight to 0. And as you can see, if I now start weight painting through the model like this, or like on this side of the model, then we rotate to this side of the model. Oh, actually, I don't see anything yet. Oh, okay. So I think I might see why. So the reason that's not actually doing anything yet with front faces only disabled is because we also need our fall off shape to be set to projected, not sphere. So if I do this again, go to this side of the model, start painting away, just like left click, left click, then rotate around my model, you're going to see that we are now painting through our model. So that can be useful in situations where you have something kind of like a cylinder where you just want the exact same weights all around every part of your model. But in our case here, that's not super useful, but it can be very useful in certain situations. So I'm going to undo that with Control+C a bunch of times. There we go. And I'm going to set my fall off shape back to sphere and turn on front faces only once again, because that's kind of what I want right now. Then we have the most frustrating Blender option I've ever encountered. I have to say, this is the most baffling and confusing thing for beginners I think there is in maybe all of Blender, but definitely in weight painting. And that is this option right here. So on your brush settings, you're going to see this option right here under options. So N, tool, options. Right here, you have this option right here called auto normalize. This should be enabled by default. Every single Blender tutorial I've ever watched on weight painting tells you to enable this option, but for some reason I don't understand, it is not enabled by default in Blender. I really hope they change that someday, but in any case, the reason I say this is because without auto normalize, you can create points on your 3D model where multiple bones have influences over 100% on your model, which is so confusing. It's really, really bad for beginners. And enabling auto normalize makes it so that when you add weight to one bone, it actually removes it from another, which is what you would expect to happen, right? And if you end up with areas on your model where the total influence exceeds 100%, which, that's going to happen when you don't have this enabled, auto normalize can help fix those issues automatically. So I would recommend to basically everyone to turn on auto normalize when you're weight painting your model. Basically 100% of the time. Sometimes it can be useful for when you're trying to do very smooth transitions, I've heard, or when you have like very high poly models and you're doing things a little bit more complicated than low poly, but really just turn on auto normalize to save yourself a world of headaches. And one final thing to mention about weight paint mode is that there's two options right up here. One is called face selection masking for painting, and the other is vertex selection. And you can actually switch between these by pressing 1 and 2 on your keyboard, just like you can switch between selection modes in edit mode. But in our case here, we really don't need these. This is great for when you need to mask specific faces or vertices on your model. But in our case here, our model is so low poly, that's mostly unnecessary. So how do we actually fix the issues we talked about in the beginning of this video, being that when we move our hand, this stuff kind of wiggles around and moves with our model. I'm going to go back into render view by pressing Z render, and then I'm going to click on my model, my hair model in object mode, and go into weight paint. Now, making sure that I'm on def spine 6, which is our head bone in our case here, we're gonna press N on our keyboard and make absolutely sure we have auto normalize enabled. Otherwise, this will not even do what we want it to do. So with auto normalize enabled, I'm going to go to the gradient tool, set that weight to 100% as well as the strength to 100%. Then I'm gonna click and drag up. I'm gonna click and drag up a few times to make absolutely sure that our head is 100% weighted to this bone. And again, with auto normalize enable, it makes it so that when you add weight to one bone, it's actually removing it from another. So now when we go to object mode, select our rig and go to pose mode by pressing Ctrl+Tab. Now, when we move it around, our hair is no longer following along with our hand, which is fantastic. But we still have this issue with our collar, where if we move our hand around, it's moving along with it, which we don't really want. And to fix that issue, I'm gonna go back into object mode and select our torso here and go back into weight paint mode by going to weight paint at the top left of our 3D viewport. Now I'm going to scroll through all of our weights right here. And by scroll through, I mean arrow key through them. And I can see that there's a lot of weights on spine 2 here, which probably means it's the bone on our rig that we want to weigh this 100% to. So I'm going to use a gradient tool once again, drag down, drag up. I, in my case here, want it 100% weighted. It could, if I wanted to, go to spine 1, set my strength a little bit lower here, aka my opacity. You can think of strength as opacity, and drag up a little bit here if I wanted a little bit of weighting, like that. And then go to object mode, click on my rig, then pose this around to see how it works. And that worked really well. That's awesome. And again, to test if this actually worked out, we're gonna move our hand here, and it worked. You can see that, again, because we have auto normalize enabled, and that makes it so that no vertex on our models can get over 100% weighted. When we used 100% weighting on our torso, it fixed this issue because it removed all the weights from other bones that were causing that weird wiggling issue. So that is now fixed, which is fantastic. One final tip I want to mention is that with your rig selected, using a Rigify rig, if you go to the Object Data Properties tab, you have a bone collections screen here, right? And these bone collections are the same as the ones we toggled in the last video, these rig layers. It's the same thing. This is just a really nice UI for all the ones you really care about when you're animating. But if we want to view all the different joints on our model that these weights are applied to, we can go to this Def tab. So Def stands for deformation, and we can isolate this bone group by clicking this little star next to it. So clicking this star will isolate it so that it's the only visible one. and we can unisolate it by clicking on the star again. But in our case here, we want to click the star so we can see all of these different deformation bones. So now you can actually click on your rig, then shift click on your model, then go into weight paint mode up here, or you can press Control plus Tab, weight paint. Now, if you want to preview what all your different weights look like, you can press Alt plus left click. So Alt plus left click is switching between our vertex groups. So you can see right here where we have our currently selected vertex group, or right here, our vertex group menu. If we press Alt plus left click, we're switching between them, which is awesome. And it would actually be a little bit cleaner of an example if I click on my torso object here. So I'll click on my torso. Actually, excuse me, I'll click on my rig, then shift click on my torso, then press Alt plus Tab and go to weight paint mode. Now, if I press Alt plus left click on my spine 2, we can see that we have a little bit weighted to it. If I go to spine 3, nothing's weighted to it. And if I go to spine 1, there's a little bit weighted to it as well. So spine 2 has like the most weighted to it, as you can see here. And spine 1 has a bit weighted to it. So that's kind of how you can preview the weights that are getting influenced on your bone. If you actually want to see where your skeleton is located, this can be a little bit more of an intuitive option. You can also rotate your bones with them selected in this mode by pressing R, G, and S. Unfortunately, that doesn't actually work on deformation bones, but that can be really useful if you're using a little bit less of a complicated rig than what Rigify gives you. However, how do you weight paint something to give it secondary motion on your character? For example, if you want your character's hair to sway, or if you want like their tail to wag, or if your character has ears, for example, and you want them to wiggle, how do you weight paint that? Well, first of all, you actually need to add that as a bone. And to do that, we're going to want to go back into object mode, select our rig, and then we're going to go back to our bone collections tab that we we're just talking about, right? And we're going to unisolate our deformation bones. So we're going to click on this and make sure that that is no longer starred so we can see all of our bones. Then I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode here. Now that I'm in edit mode, I want to press Shift plus A to add a bone. So this is a brand new bone on our rig. And I'm going to go to my bone collections tab right here and press this plus icon to add a brand new bone collection. And it's just going to be called bones here, but I'm going to rename this hair. So this is a brand new bone collection, but there's nothing actually to assign to it right now. If I press the isolate button, there's going to be no bones in there because we actually need to assign things to this bone collection in order for them to be in there. So to do that, I'm just going to make sure my brand new bone, which is right here, we can see the name right here, is bone. This is my brand new one and it's selected right here. So making sure this brand new bone is selected, I'm going to click assign. Now, if I isolate into this bone collection by pressing the star icon, you can see that there's now a bone in it. One bone, the one we just created, which is fantastic. So I am now going to go into the front view by pressing 1 on my keyboard. So that's the orthographic front view. Click on my bone, press G plus Z to move it up, then R to rotate it like this. And again, it's super important. Remember when we talked about bone heads versus tails, this is the head of our bone right here. This is the tail of our bone right here, which means when we rotate our bone, it's going to rotate from this point right here. So it's really important that when we position our bone, which we're going to rig to the front hair right here, that this is the top of our bone and this is like the bottom of our bone, basically. So I'm going to position it, scale it, G to move, S to scale, kind of like this. Grab the head of the bone like this, kind of just line it up like that. All right, then I'm going to press 3 on my keyboard, G plus Y to move this forward, plus Y, then kind of line it up like that. That's looking really good. And while we're in edit mode, I should also, first of all, get out of orthographic view by clicking on this little icon right here. But I also want to rename my bone to not just the default bone name. So I'm going to press F2 on my keyboard while I'm in edit mode and while I have my bone selected and call this hair underscore front. Just for example, you can call it whatever you want, of course. With hair underscore front selected, just for fun, I can also go to the bone tab right here, go to viewport display and make this bone, we'll make it purple just for fun. So this bone is now purple. And I'm going to go back into the Object Data Properties tab right here. And now that that's all taken care of, we want to actually make sure that this bone is weighted to our hair because it's not actually weighted to our hair yet. And to do that, we want to click on our hair model, then shift click on the bone we just created, then press Control plus P, then do armature deform with empty groups. You could do automatic weights, but sometimes that's just not going to do what you want it to do. So in this case here, we're just going to do with empty groups. So now, if we click on our hair model, you're going to see there's a brand new vertex group at the bottom right here called hair_front, which is awesome. That's the bone we just made and the vertex group we just made. And this vertex group would not exist unless we do what we just did, which is click on our model, shift click on our bone. So click on our model, shift click on our bone, then Control P, armature deform with empty groups or automatic weights if you prefer. But in our case here, we want empty groups. So with that done, if we move our bone around, nothing's going to happen because we still need to weight paint it, which is what we're just talking about, right? So all we need to do now is click on our hair model, go to the weight painting tab, go to our brand new vertex group right here, hair_front, then click on our draw tool, set weight and strength to 100%, then weight paint this singular vert 100%. And something that I forgot to mention earlier is you can change your brush size by changing this radius value, which you can also change with the hotkey of F. So F is how you change your brush size, like that. So that works in the draw tool as well as the blur tool, like so. And you can also change your opacity, aka strength, with Shift plus F. So Shift plus F is how you quickly change your opacity, and it's even visualized here. So like 100% is 100% opacity, and we get more and more transparent as we go lower values like that, which is pretty cool. But you can change the size of your brush by pressing F. So F is how you change the size of your brush. And if you press Control plus F, you can change the weight. So if you want to change your overall intensity, you can press Control plus F to change your weight, but Shift plus F is how you change your opacity, essentially. Now, if we go back into object mode, click on our brand new bone here, and press Control plus Tab to go into pose mode, we now have weight painted this hair on our model, which is fantastic. However, there's one issue, where if we go into object mode and we unisolate our new bone collection, which is the hair bone collection, and then we click on our model's head right here, we try to move it around, you're going to see that our bone is not following along with our head. And this ties back into what we talked about in the last video about parent-child relationships with bones. We need to make sure that this bone is the child of this head bone. Otherwise, it's not going to know that it needs to follow along with our head bone. So to do that, all we need to do is press Tab to go back into edit mode and click on our new hair front bone. Then we need to go to the bone properties menu right here. And in this menu, there's a relations option. So, a relations dropdown where you can set the parent of your bone. And remember, when we were going through all the vertex groups of our hair here, we saw that there was a vertex group called, if we go all the way to the top here, def, and def is short for deformation, spine 006. So def spine 006 is indeed our head bone's name using Rigify. So remembering that, we're going to go back into object mode, click on our bone here, go back into the relations tab right here. So this is bone properties, relations, and then from parent, we're going to click, we have to be in edit mode. This is object mode. So we're going to make sure we're in edit mode with our new bone selected, which is hair front. Then we're going to go to relations, parent, and do def spine .006, which is the name of our head bone. You're going to see there's a little line that appeared from our head bone to our hair front bone. And when we go into object mode, when we go into pose mode now and rotate our head bone around, you're going to see that our hair bone is now following along with it exactly as we'd expect. So now we can animate this secondary motion on our hair. And we just rigged hair, but this also works for tails. This also works for ears. It works for anything that you want secondary motion for on your character, and it's very easy to do. So that about covers it. In the next video, we're going to talk about rigging your character's faces in 2D. So our character has a two-dimensional face texture here. We're going to talk about how to animate those using geometry nodes. Hope you're looking forward to it, and thank you so much for watching. And just so you know, we are in the final stretch of this series with only a few videos on rigging remaining. I've mentioned this before, but the gum mode version of the series will increase in price after this series is fully completed, so I'd highly recommend going to the description box below and checking it out today in order to lock in the absolute best value on it. It includes an extensive hotkey guide PDF, the final Love Chan model that's fully textured, fully rigged, and fully UV'd from this series, downloadable versions of all the videos in the series with even more coming soon. We're about to hit 50 sales on this, which is amazing, and already have 5 perfect 5-star reviews. So by all means, to get the absolute best value, click that link in the video description below this video to check it out, and thanks for watching.